Hi everyone, PV here, and welcome to my new YouTube channel. So for those who don't know me, I am a Magic the Gathering professional player, have been for almost 20 years at this point, and I'm the current Magic World Champion. And the goal of this channel will be to make you a better Magic player. So whether you want to improve just because you want to improve, or because you want to compete, or because you want to compete at a higher level, this will be the channel for you. And we're going to do that through a variety of things, really. For example, some videos could be about a format, right? What are the top decks in the format, a tier list, these are the top 5, you should play any of these, why not, right? Or we can go a little bit deeper, we can do a video on one specific deck, talk about the individual choices in that deck, what cards are good, what cards are bad, what you should play, and how to sideboard versus the most popular matches, for example, what comes in, what goes out. Or we can talk about an interesting play sequence that happened in a game that I played or that someone else played, or an interesting game as a whole, and pick concepts that happen in the game that I think are good to know. Or we can just do a general strategy thing on concepts that I think are important, right? Or we can also talk about spoilers, right? Oh, these are the new cards, here's how I believe they can be played, these are the cards that are good, these are the cards that are bad. So it will just be a lot of different things, but all things that I believe are important for you to understand if you want to be a better Magic player. So if this sounds like the kind of content that you are interested in, then please like and subscribe, and let's go to our first video. And our first video is 5 mistakes that you're making that are very easy to correct. So I do a lot of coaching, and I notice that while I'm coaching people, they tend to make the same mistakes over and over. So a lot of people make the same kinds of mistakes. And some of those mistakes are a little bit deeper, right? They take more to correct. You need to understand things on a more fundamental level. But some of these mistakes are just very easy to correct. They're just pinpointed things that you can do and will immediately increase your win percentage. And that is what this video is about. It's about things that you can correct right now that are making you lose percentage points, right? They're not making or breaking your game. They're not making you, oh, I would be a number 1 mythic player if I did these things and instead I'm bronze 4. No, this is not what those things are about. But they will just increase your win percentage a little bit, and they do add up. So the first one of these things is stop sacrificing your Fabled Passage. Right, because Fabled Passage is one of the most played cards in Standard, and sometimes even in other formats. And the biggest mistake that I see people making with it is that they sacrifice it too early. Right now in Standard, there are a lot of decks that have a lot of benefit from having Fabled Passage. For example, Grew Adventures, right? You have Landfall, you have the Elemental, you have the Mammoth. So you have several cards that get better if you can sacrifice a land and put them into play. And a lot of people get too tunneled on the deck thinning aspect of it, right? Because deck thinning, for those who don't know, is a concept that means you remove a bad card from your deck, right? So when you sacrifice Fabled Passage, you remove a land from your deck, assuming you don't want to draw lands. This makes sense, right? Because you're taking away from your deck a card that you don't want to draw. So that is a good thing, and that is why people tend to sacrifice Fabled Passage as early as possible. But the thing is that it is just a very minute thing. The percentage that you get is very, very small. And it's usually not worth it if you have any reason not to do that. So for example, imagine you have nothing in your hand as a Grow Adventures player, and then you sacrifice your Fabled Passage because you want to draw something, right? And you draw Brushfire Elemental. Then you can play, but you can't sacrifice the Fabled Passage because you don't have it anymore. So you just lost out on 2 damage. And that is way, way, way more important than any deck thing you might have done. So when you're in a spot like this, just don't sacrifice your Fabled Passage. And the same is true for a Rogues deck, for example, Demon Rogues. You have Hedron Crab, or Ruin Crab, rather, in your deck. So you want to wait to sacrifice your passage when you can get your landfall triggers, right? And it's not only in these situations that you shouldn't sacrifice it. So for example, sometimes you don't know which colors of mana you want, right? Sometimes you have you're missing blue mana and you're missing black mana with a certain deck. And then if you sacrifice Fabled Passage now, you have to choose between getting blue or getting black, right? And if you wait until you draw a blue mana or a black mana, then you sacrifice the Fabled Passage and you find the one that's missing. So at this point, you just want to make sure that you have all your colors, right? You don't want to double up, so you wait until you draw one or until you have to play a spell. There's another moment where you should wait. And the final moment where you should wait is when you have a reason to make a creature bigger in a different turn. For example, say you have a Brushfire Elemental, right? And then you sacrifice your Fabled Passage, you're going to deal 2 extra damage, right? So you're getting 2 extra damage this turn or next turn. but you have a card like the Great Henge in your hand, or a card like Embercleave in your hand. In that spot, if you wait a turn, and then next turn you play another land and sacrifice a Fable Passage, even sometimes another Fable Passage, you're going to get a trigger when it matters more. Right, the 2 damage is going to be the same, and you're even taking a risk here because they could kill all your landfall creatures and you lose out on the 2 damage. But the good players will mostly wait in these spots because you're getting more out of your trigger. So you're getting the landfall trigger in a turn where you're getting a discount for the Great Henge for that, right? You're getting a landfall trigger in a turn where you're going to double the power because of Embercleave. So in that deck, specifically Gruul Adventures, but also Dimir Rogues and a lot of other decks, it usually pays off to be more patient than people normally are with Fable Passage. So ignore the deck thinning aspect. For the most part, it is almost completely irrelevant, and focus on the triggers that you're getting and the triggers that you're potentially getting, even if you don't have that card in your hand yet. The second thing you can do to increase your win percentage is to start paying attention to the number of cards in people's graveyards. Right now in Standard, there are a lot of cards that care about card quantity in graveyards, both yours and your opponent's. For example, Dimir Rogues is a deck that relies heavily on putting cards into opponent's graveyards, right? And there's a card that's into the story that costs 4 or 7 mana, depending on whether your opponent has 7 or more cards in the graveyard. And that is a huge difference, right? This is a game-winning difference, whether you can play this card for 4 mana or for 7 mana. So if you are playing against a deck that has Into the Story, or that you suspect has Into the Story, such as Dimir Rogues, you should make it a big priority to not put your 7th card in the graveyard. And that means sometimes not even playing a spell, right? This means not playing a removal spell, not playing a Scorching Dragonfire, for example, on a specific rogue, because that will be the 7th card in the graveyard, and that will be exactly what the opponent needs. Sometimes it means not sacrificing a Fable Passage, because that will be the 7th card in the graveyard, and just, okay, I'm not going to sacrifice the Fable Passage, which means I'm not going to play my spell this turn, I'm just going to play next turn, because I don't want to put my 7th card in the graveyard just yet, right? And this is something that I play a lot of Dimir Rogues, and it comes up all the time. I have Into the Story, basically stuck in my hand. I cannot cast it. I can't cast anything else. My opponent is on 6 cards or 5 cards, and then they very helpfully put 1 or 2 cards in the graveyard for me for basically no reason, right? They get a creature in combat that they didn't need to, and then it dies, and that's the 7th card, or they cast a removal spell. So really just be mindful of this interaction, and your win percentage versus Dimir Rogues will just not skyrocket, but you will notice a meaningful difference. Obviously, once you have 7 or 8 cards in the graveyard, at this point it doesn't matter, and then you feel free to do whatever you want. And the second thing is that, you have to pay attention to the number of cards in their graveyard, because people run a lot of escape cards, right? They play cards like Ox of Agonas, they play Kroxa, and sometimes they want you to put a card in the graveyard for them, and you shouldn't do that. So, for example, if they have Ox, right, they have 8 cards, Ox and another 7, they need 1 more. So this is probably not the best time to Heartless Act that 1/1, right, that Brushfire Elemental. It's not the right time to maybe play a Blitzchief's Thirst on that, any creature really, a Lustruck Beast. Maybe it's better to just take 5 damage, take 6, 7 damage, just to stop your opponent from bringing that creature back that very same turn. Right, so basically, be mindful of what cards can use the graveyard. Magic Arena is very helpful. It just highlights all these cards for you. So know that you have a choice. You don't have to put your cards in the graveyard, and you don't have to put their cards in the graveyard. Just pay attention to these number thresholds, and don't be helpful to your opponent. The third thing that I think you can do to improve your win percentage is to start returning your companions to your hand earlier in the game. So there are several decks that play companions, right, in both standard and historic right now. The most common ones are Lures of the Dream Dam in Dimir Rogues, and Yorion's Sky Nomad in the Esper Yorion decks, or Dimir Yorion decks. And one thing that I notice a lot is that people don't bring them back to their hands as early as they should. And that is because people want to bluff something, right? Most of the time, people want to bluff something. Because these are blue decks with lots of instants sometimes, and it is an effective bluff, right? Because the Lures of the Dream Den is in its face up, right? Your opponent knows you have that. So by not bringing it, you're kind of selling them on the idea that you have something. You have a Drawn in the Lock, you have a Didn't Say Please, you have a Heartless Act, right? You have an Essence Scatter or a Rogue that you can play with Flash. You have Miscreant. You have one card that you can play, because if you had nothing, obviously you would have brought the companion back. So it is an effective bluff, but it's just not worth it, right? Because these are mana-intensive decks that have very mana-intensive turns, And you just cannot afford to bring back a companion and play it in the same turn a lot of the time, right? Lures is a mana-intensive card. You have to bring the lures back, then play the lures, and then play something else, and then maybe even keep mana up to play something else. So you just can't do all of that in the same turn, and it's gonna punish you in the future that you didn't just return that to your hand when you had the chance, right? So I would say that almost all of the time, it is worth just, if you have nothing to do, don't pass with 3 mana up that you're not going to use. Just return your companion to your hand. Yeah, tell your opponent, shields are down, I have nothing. That's fine, it is worth it. So people get too tunneled on the idea of representing something, bluffing something, and I think it's just not as important as getting that material card in your hand. And sometimes you can even do that if you have something to play, right? I think people, if you have a didn't say please, maybe you should bring the lures back anyway, because that is just more important than keeping the 3 mana up, right? The didn't say please isn't going to go away. You can play it next turn. You can play it 5 turns in the future. So I think in general, people are too conservative with their companions, and they end up wasting a lot of mana throughout a game or throughout a tournament by just doing nothing. Right? If you have something else to do, obviously, if you're going to play a rogue, right, or if you're going to play a removal spell for sure at the end of the turn, then that's fine. Don't return the companion. You're not going to waste your mana. But if it's a counter spell, like a Mystical Dispute or something that you potentially might play, it's often worth it to just return the companion to your hand as soon as you can, to just get that over with and just make sure you use that 3 mana rather than go to waste. So as a general rule, return your companions to your hand earlier in the game than you are. Just use that mana a little bit more. The fourth thing you can do is to start letting your opponent's Doom Foretold go. So in Standard, we have a deck called Esper Doom Foretold. It has the card Doom Foretold in it, and that's a card that's actually very hard to play against, and people very often mess up, right? And what people do is they think that they can outlast it. They think that the goal of the card is to not let it go off, right? The goal when playing against the card is not let it go off. So you, obviously your opponent drawing a card, you discarding a card, you're getting a 2/2, and all damage that is relevant. You don't want that to happen. So people just throw stuff into the Doom Foretold to delay that from happening as much as possible, and on the dream that your opponent might have to sacrifice the Doom Foretold themselves. But that is not how you play against that card. That is the dream scenario for your opponent. That is why the card is in their deck. So the goal of the card is not to go off. The goal of the card is to just destroy all your cards turn per turn, right? So if that's what's happening, your opponent's winning. So the goal for you, as the person playing against that card, should be to have it go off as soon as possible. And that means sometimes just not playing anything, right? Just wasting your turn rather than playing something into it. And yeah, it's bad when it goes off, but that's the better alternative than it destroying your things turn by turn, right? There's often this dream that you're going to outlast your opponent, and then, well, they're going to run out of stuff, and eventually they're going to have to sacrifice the Doom Foretold, and then I win that exchange. Right, but their whole deck is built for that. That almost never happens, right? The reason they put several cards in their deck is because they get to sacrifice them for the Doom Foretold, right? So by just fueling it and trading one of your cards for one of their cards every turn, you're just playing right into their hands. This is what their deck is built to do, right? So don't do that. Just let it go as soon as possible, and that is how you play against that card, right? That is how you minimize the damage that Doom Foretold does, is to keep it out of play for as long as possible. The longer it stays in play, in general, the better for your opponent it is. So don't be afraid of just letting it go, right? Just don't play something, create a scenario where you're fine just untapping, that goes away, and then you play all your stuff, right? So don't try to outlast it, don't try to beat it that way, don't try to brute force your way through it. Just accept that this is how it's gonna go, and you're gonna have to lose a card, you're gonna have to give them a 2/2, and then you play the game after that. And the fifth and final thing that you can do to immediately increase your win percentage is to start playing Collected Company in your Sacrifice deck in Historic. I see a lot of people playing the Rakdos Sacrifice deck, and that to me is mind-boggling, because I think the Collected Company deck is better against basically everything. Right? The only reason you would potentially not want to play Collected Company is because you really want to play a lot of Chandras in the main deck, to Chandra Torch of Defiance, to be able to kill your Shrine. But that's not even that big a thing anymore. And it's just, Collected Company is just too good in that deck, right? That deck is a deck that cares about specific creatures, right? Because he really wants to find Mayhem Devil against some people, really wants to find Midnight Reaper or Priest of the Forgotten Gods against some people. And it's also a deck that cares about card quantity. Right? It wants to find 2 creatures to fuel its Priest of the Forgotten Gods. It wants to find 2 creatures to sacrifice to Wolf Strider to get Mayhem Devil triggers. So you want both specific cards in certain situations and also a quantity of cards, which means Collecting Company is the perfect card for you. And it blows my mind that people are choosing not to play this card in that deck. So my recommendation for you, if you're playing a Sacrifice deck in History, is to just add Collecting Company to your deck. This will just make your deck better in almost every matchup, right? In the mirror, it's much better because Mayhem Devil is one of the most important cards. Versus Auras and Goblins, it's makes it much better because you, again, want to find that Mayhem Devil or the Priest of Forgotten Gods versus Auras. So you're trying to find specific cards versus these decks. And just a tutor for these cards is good enough, right? And versus a deck like Sultai, it also makes your deck better because it's an instant speed way of putting creatures in play that plays around sweepers. So it basically improves your matchup against everybody. And yeah, sometimes, the mana base isn't perfect, obviously, but it isn't perfect in Rakdos either, but the mana base isn't as good as it could be. And sometimes sideboarding is a little bit awkward because you lower the creature count in your deck, and then sometimes you just hit one creature or you miss outright on company. But I honestly think it's worth it. I think you will just notice a dramatic increase in your win percentage if you just put that card in your deck, even though sometimes it backfires, right? Because it's okay that you're not finding two creatures if you're finding the right creature. And when you have both modes, when both modes are acceptable, right? Just finding Mayhem Devil is a good enough mode of Collecting Company. Or finding two other creatures is also a good enough mode. Then you have a lot of outs to hit, and you're not going to miss nearly as often. And that's what I got for today. So hopefully it was useful to you to make you a better Magic player. Again, if you liked it, you want to see more of this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe. It won't always be like this, right? This was a more generic video. Sometimes we'll go a little bit more in depth about a deck, about a card, about a specific concept. But this is the kind of thing that you should expect from this YouTube channel. And if you want to find me, you can always find me on Twitter at PVDDR. So I do coaching, I do Magic coaching. So if you want information, just DM me on Twitter. DMs are open. Or you can also find my articles on StarCityGames.com. I write every week. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this and see you next video.